The opening scene is set in 2044, when a 25-year-old Joe is waiting near some fields in Arkansas. He works as an assassin, also called a looper for a crime syndicate called the Mob. As it happens, the tracking systems in the future of 2074 are advanced enough that not a single body goes missing undetected by the police. As time traveling has been discovered in the future, though declared illegal by world leaders, the syndicate covers its crimes by sending its enemies back in time so they can be executed in the past. Joe glances at his watch and aims his gun, and shortly after, a victim appears on the spot with their head covered and hands tied. After Joe executes him, he cuts open the victim's jacket to reveal 4 silver bars, which are intended as payment for loopers. Next, Joe carries the body to his truck and drives to an abandoned factory where he disposes it off in the incinerator. It is shown that Joe has collected many silver bars up until now, and in his free time, he indulges in drugs and partying at a club owned by a present-day mafia assigned by the Mob. When the Mob decides to retire a looper, they send the future version of the very looper to them as a target, and once the looper executes them and finds gold bars under the target's clothes, they know that they have been retired and will live until 2074, followed by their death. This is referred to as closing the loop. One night, Joe is visited by his friend Seth, also a looper and one of the 10% of the population who are telekinetic. A troubled Seth explains that he figured out that his target from earlier that day was his future self, which meant the Mob wanted to close his loop. In the future, Seth started humming the same song Seth's mother used to sing to him in his childhood. He knew it was him under the cover. After unmasking his future self, Seth learns that the Mob has a new boss called the Rainmaker, who overran the future Mob bosses and is intent on retiring all the loopers, which is why a looper closes his loop almost every day. Since Seth was unable to kill his future self who ran away, now the Mafia wants present-day Seth dead, which is why Seth has come to Joe for his help. Suddenly, the Mafia's elite force known as Gatmen shows up at Joe's door, so Joe hides Seth inside his apartment's floor safe, where he usually stashes his silver bars. Next, he opens the door and the henchmen search everywhere for Seth, but are unsuccessful. One of the guys, Kid Blue, tells Joe that the boss has asked to see him, so Joe complies and they go to meet Abe, the head of the Mafia. As it turns out, the Mob assigned Abe as the one to overlook the work of the loopers, which is why they sent him in the past, and ever since, Abe has amassed a powerful mafia that controls the entire city. Abe warns Joe that he knows Seth must have come to him for help, so either they will confiscate half of the silver that he has saved for his future, or he needs to turn his friend in. Joe ponders for a while, but since he is sure that the Mafia will find Seth one way or the other, he gives up his location. In the next scene, we see the old Seth, who notices a message appear on his arm, which means that Seth has been captured by the Mafia, and they carved an address on his arm. Despite this, old Seth decides to keep running. Suddenly, he notices that 2 of his fingers are missing. This means that the Mafia was torturing Seth. Next, they cut off his nose, and old Seth's nose goes missing. He steals a car, but moments later, he notices his feet have disappeared, implying that the Mafia cut off his feet and his car crashes, since the address on his arm is nearby. So old Seth crawls to the location using his elbows and starts banging on the door, but soon after his hands also disappear, implying that Abe's men had dismembered all of Seth's limbs. Just then, Kid Blue opens the door and kills the future Seth with a gunshot, while the mangled body of present-day Seth also breathes its last. In the next scene, Joe is quite upset over turning his friend in, but he knows better than to mess with the Mafia. Life goes on, and one day he is waiting for his target as usual, but the target does not show up at the time specified to him. A few moments later, the target appears, but surprisingly, he does not have a face cover, nor are his hands tied. Joe notices that he has the same blue eyes as his and assumes him to be his older version, but he still shoots at him. The old Joe takes the bullet to his back, exposing the gold bars, which confirms Joe's suspicion. The old Joe knocks Joe out, and when he wakes up, he finds that his truck and gun are missing. He finds a note from old Joe urging him to run away to save his life. When Joe heads to his apartment, he realizes it has been plundered by Abe's men. As he retrieves some hidden cash and weapons, Kid Blue attacks him. Joe manages to lock him in his floor safe and tries to convey that he intends to kill his future version himself, but Kid Blue does not care and starts shooting at him from within the safe. As more Gat men enter the apartment, Joe heads for the fire exit to escape. However, he loses his grip and falls, causing him to pass out. The scene changes, and in another timeline, Joe shoots old Joe, who arrives like any other target, face covered and hands tied. When he finds the gold bars on the target's back, he accepts his retirement and moves to Shanghai, where he indulges in parties and drugs. This extravagant lifestyle destroys his savings, and after 6 years he is left with no money, so he becomes a hitman. One day, after 17 years, he comes across a woman called Summer and falls in love with her. She even helps him fight his addiction, and he lives a beautiful life with her for 7 years, until it is 2047 and the mob's men arrive to send him to the past to close his loop. He accepts his fate and gets down on his knees, but suddenly his wife walks in, causing one of the men to shoot her. Her death destroys old Joe, and despite being tied, he overpowers his captors and kills them. Next, he uses the time-traveling machine to return to his past self, where he escapes from Joe. However, old Joe starts experiencing whatever goes on in young Joe's life in the form of memories. When he remembers that young Joe went to his house even though he told him to run, he heads there just in time to stop the Gat men from shooting young Joe when he fell from the fire escape. Then he drags the unconscious young Joe to a safe spot. When young Joe wakes up, he finds himself near a train station with old Joe's message in his pocket. But instead of running away, he decides to find old Joe. On the other hand, old Joe breaks into a local library and pulls some records from the database. He intends to kill Rainmaker as a child, so his wife can live. Using the numbers written on his hand that pertain to the Rainmaker's identity, old Joe manages to pull a map that shows 3 babies and their locations. Suddenly, the name Beatrix shows up on his arm, reminding him of the waitress in the diner he used to visit frequently when he was younger. In the next scene, old Joe shows up at that diner, where he finds Joe waiting for him. Old Joe tells him how he intends to kill the Rainmaker so he can save his wife. He shows young Joe the number that coincides with the Rainmaker's current location, and informs him that when the Rainmaker was young, when someone killed his mother, leaving him an orphan. This is what fueled the Rainmaker's rage to become the biggest crime boss in the future and finish all the loopers. Young Joe doesn't want him messing with his life's course, but before he can shoot old Joe, Kid Blue and Gat men show up, and a gunfight occurs. Both Joes escape with bits of old Joe's map. Joe ends up following the map to a farm where he runs into a woman named Sarah and her son Sid. Sarah closes her doors on him when she sees his gun, but the young Sid convinces her to let him in, given his dehydrated and wounded condition. The next day, Sarah gets mad when Joe shows him the numbers on the map, which are Sid's birthday and the location of the hospital where he was born. Sarah shoots Joe with her gun, and the injured Joe explains everything to her, except that the person who wants to kill her son is his future version. When Sarah tells him that 2 more kids were born on the same day as Sid in that hospital, Joe realizes that old Joe plans on killing all 3 kids since he does not know who will grow up to become the Rainmaker. Meanwhile, as old Joe experiences young Joe's encounter, he rubs the scar of the wound Sarah gave young Joe moments ago. He eliminates the first child while evading Abe's men and makes his way toward the second child. Unbeknownst to him, Kid Blue has him under surveillance. On the other hand, young Joe asks Sarah to let him protect Sid and her, which would benefit his future too. When a Gat man Jesse finds his way to the farm, he pretends to pose as an FBI agent and asks Sarah if she has seen either of the 2 Joes. With that, he searches the house, but before he can catch Joe, Sid shows Joe a secret passage that helps him escape. Jesse leaves, and later that night, Sarah lets Joe in her room where he notices she is telekinetic. Sarah mentions that when she saw the photo, she understands that Joe is trying to protect Sid from his future self, after which they make love. The next day, Jesse visits again and holds Sarah at gunpoint. Joe tries to convince him to let him kill old Joe, but he doesn't agree. In the commotion, Sid slips from the stairs, prompting Sarah to drag Joe out of the house. Instantly, Sid has a fit of rage, and everything levitates inside the house, including Jesse, who eventually explodes and dies. Joe realizes that Sid has extraordinary telekinetic powers and will become the Rainmaker, but instantly remembers that since he shares his memories with old Joe, it is no longer a secret from him. He tells Sarah how he will grow up to wreak havoc on Earth, but Sarah pleads for his life, promising to help Sid control his powers, so Joe asks Sarah and Sid to leave. On the other hand, Kid Blue hides inside the second child's room, captures Old Joe using a taser, and brings him to Abe. However, Old Joe manages to break free, killing Abe and his Gat men. He steals all the silver and gold bars and comes to the farm, where he encounters young Joe, who refuses to let Old Joe kill Sid. Just then, Kid Blue shows up shooting at the Joes, so young Joe kills him, while Old Joe tracks Sid. When they run through a sugarcane field, Sarah falls and Old Joe shoots at Sid. While the bullet just grazes Sid's cheek, he loses his temper, and his powers fling Sarah and Old Joe into the air. Just before he can destroy everything, Sid looks at his mother, who calms him down, and he gets distracted, which causes everyone to settle. When Old Joe aims for Sid again, Sarah screams at her son to run into the field. At that moment, young Joe arrives, but he is too far to save Sarah. He realizes that his future version is the reason why Sid will be orphaned and become the crazy crime boss in the future. So he instantly uses his gun to kill himself, which erases Old Joe's existence as well. With that, the movie ends. Thanks for watching Looper. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you next time. Welcome, sci-fi fans. Futurist Flicks is thrilled to launch our exclusive membership program designed for loyal fans like you. By joining, you'll unlock early access to recap videos, unseen recap videos, raffle prizes, free merch giveaways, exclusive content and behind-the-scenes insights, access to community events, live streams, and Q&A sessions. Join the Cosmic Crew today and get instant access to exclusive perks. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more intergalactic adventures.